So now I want to move into just quickly council's obligations. So the FOIP legislation does say that council has a duty to designate the head of the public body, and council must do this by bylaw. So by bylaw, you have to designate a person, or you can designate a group of people as the head of the public body. Also, if you plan to charge fees, so that includes your $25, your $50, any of the fees that are subject in the regulation, that has to be in the bylaw before you can actually charge those fees. So just to keep that in mind. So as of right now, I couldn't find any bylaw that covered these particular fees on the website. That is what I'm saying.
Which bylaw would you typically find that?
So the town, we actually have like a FOIP bylaw. But one of the things I've seen is you may have a designated officer's bylaw. So you may have one that covers your assessor, your head of your public body for FOIP, all of these designated officers. If it's your CAO, it could be in your CAO bylaw. So things like that. But so that's something that that's typically how it's handled. In terms of fees, most communities have a rate bylaw that sets out all of the rates. But some public bodies choose to put it in, one specific bylaw for each different issue. The problem with that is it becomes really hard for council to manage the rates on an ongoing basis. So having it really centralized is like easier for them to manage. Council also has a duty to protect information as discussed in camera. So because those exceptions apply to in camera, council has a duty, and the MGA actually says that that is a duty that council has. So in terms of authority for in-camera meetings, because the MGA and the FOIP regulation provide, council can close all or part of their meetings provided that they meet the exceptions that we just went through. So provided that there's an exception under Division 2 or Part 1 of FOIP or Section 18 of the FOIP regulations, council does have the authority to close their meetings and therefore restrict access to the information that that is discussed in those meetings. So just some quick best practice considerations. So this is more for council and administration. So do protect personal and third-party information. It will serve you well to just make that your practice. I'd suggest drafting, passing a bylaw, appointing the head of the public body, and establishing rates pursuant to FOIP. And I would spell out the rates and the wording exactly as it is in the regulation. Develop in-camera meeting and access to information procedures. So one of the things that I frequently see and have had to work with our council about is you get sent this in-camera information. Well, what happens once you're done that in-camera session? So making sure that you have a way of disposing of that information so that it doesn't become subject to a breach or anything like that. So that's something that I would recommend. And then post information about accessing records on the public body's website. So typically municipalities have a section right on their website about FOIP and how to go about accessing information. So that's something I'd recommend. In terms of don'ts, don't share personal information that in council documents, particularly if it falls into that unreasonable invasion of privacy. Or openly discuss that information, that personal information in meetings. I've seen it happen where it's, names and things slip out. If you're dealing with, negotiations or a purchase of land, you'll want to be very clear about setting out the land description, not necessarily the owner of that land in your motion and that sort of thing. Don't talk about in-camera items outside of these sessions. So again, the MGA says you shouldn't do it. It's something that's really, really sensitive, and it's something that should just be amongst the 7 of you and anyone else that was in there as part of that discussion. One of the things that was brought to my attention is that there was actually an individual who was told to contact the mayor and council if they wanted access for information. That is not something that is not the process, it's not in alignment with FOIP, and so I'd really discourage that type of advice to residents and ratepayers. And then lastly, don't exceed the fees that are set out in Schedule 2 of the regulation. Those are the maximums. Unfortunately, it's not a lot of money, but that's not the purpose of the legislation. It's just meant to give some sort of a little bit of cost recovery, but it's not meant to be on a full cost recovery basis. In terms of resources, the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner has a ton of resources on FOIP, and like I said, they publish all of their orders and everything is available there. Service Alberta also has great resources. So they actually have a whole guide, an annotated guide of FOIP that is available on their website for free. So you can actually just go on it, you can find and go through there. They have a number of information guides, brochures, all sorts of things that you can use. That's it. Questions?
Question. On the sale of municipal land.
Yeah.
Private, development,
Okay.
how much of that is covered under the FOIP? Obviously, how much of that is covered under FOIP?
So your negotiations are likely covered under FOIP. Depending on the price value, if it's less than market value, you may have an obligation to hold a public hearing. So things just to keep in mind around that. Again, it's really hard to comment without actually...
How about the contract between municipality and
And a developer? Absolutely.
that part of FOIP?
It's subject to... So somebody could request it under FOIP. It's not protected. So what I'm saying is you would go through the FOIP process probably with the developer. You'd say, you know what, we've had a request for this agreement. You'd invite them to be part of the process, let them talk to you and give you written, and that would be my other thing around harm, have them put it in writing. Have them clearly state it's their job to show you that where the harm is occurring. Have them show you where the harm is, and then the head of the public body takes all of that information into consideration with making the decision to release. But typically, agreements are not protected. It may be certain information in them that may be protected, but the bulk of it is not.
The price of the property and terms and conditions of the sale, that should be open to the public.
It should, provided that there's not something in the agreement that explicitly states you can't release that information, right? So sometimes you see this in contracts, they'll say this contract cannot be released, is confidential and all this type of language, then you can't release. So if that is in there, then would be subject to FOIP. But typically, that would be, what my suggestion would be, if you're in negotiations with somebody around that, I would say, what part of this contract does this confidentiality provision actually apply to? Right? Because they can't simply say it applies to the whole thing. The Privacy Commissioner doesn't support that sort of logic. They say, if there's specific parameters, show us where it applies. And then I would build that into your contract. Any other questions?
This isn't so much a question as an observation. There's hundreds of municipalities in the province of Alberta, and there must be, some municipalities that build a FOIP moat around the municipality, and it's extremely difficult to get information. And there must be other municipalities who take the opposite end of the spectrum, who say, we're going to be open and transparent wherever we can be.
Yep.
And only hold information if it's FOIP protected. Is that true, that there's a wide variety of approaches?
I have seen that. I would say with my team, we may run it through FOIP, and that's only if we have personal information, right? If we know that there's going to be personal information in there, we're definitely running it through FOIP just so we can capture the process, protect the information. So for instance, if your information was in a document, you'd want to know, right? If I'm thinking about releasing it, right? That's a courtesy and a responsibility I have to you. But in terms of studies and things that are generally already public information, bylaws, policies, all of those sorts of information, that should not follow through FOIP. That should just be publicly released, and in fact, typically, it should just be already on the website. So do you have any sort of information that you're looking for, or?
Well, specifically, a focus of our organization, our special interest group, is taxes
Right,
and water and sewer rates.
right,
And our concerns are focused on what appear to be rates that are higher than comparable municipalities in southern Alberta. So we would tend to want to ask information that isn't related to a specific contracted service cost, but more to how are those costs calculated, and why are they significantly different from other municipalities
Right.
that appear to be comparable to us.
right.
Now, that's obviously a very open-ended statement, but, I mean, I have had the experience where I thought I was asking a pretty straightforward and reasonable question, and I'm the one who got you have to refer that to mayor and council answer.
Right,
I don't know if that's where you picked that up.
maybe.
Which I thought was quite odd.
Right.
In fact, it was so odd that it said if I was an individual taxpayer, they could provide the information, but if I was asking the question on behalf of the Turner Valley Ratepayers Board, it would have to be addressed to mayor and council.
So that's what I mean. The act doesn't say you have to be a resident. It doesn't say, right, so I could go to Black Diamond and I can ask for information. I don't have to be a resident there. So the fact that you're affiliated with this group doesn't
Put me off side.
no, not at all, not at all. And with regards to, so rates, I would say, so rates should be already public information. How they're calculated, if they have studies and things that were used to calculate those rates, I would say those should just automatically be released without going through a formal FOIP process. But yeah, I can't speak to what they have. That would be for them to sort of assess and